Good morning, everybody.
God let my love
Happy Monday.
show in case you'd say no.
Thank you all for being here. We know you have many, many choices to make, and we appreciate you choosing to spend some time with us. Really appreciate you. Hope you had a good weekend. Lots to talk about today. A lot going on. Before we go too much deeper, I would like to welcome our special guest this morning, and I'm honored to have our friend Felice co-hosting with. Good morning. Early for you, but not as early before the crappy thing that is daylight savings time. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. Top of the morning to you. I'm just getting used to using an audio mixer. Yeah. Top of the morning. And yeah, we're only 2 hours apart now. And I love the mornings. I love to get things done early. And I've wanted to do a show with you and have a high level, intelligent conversation for a while. Long time listener, first time caller, I guess you could say.
Longtime fan. I appreciate that. I feel the same way. We're going to get into a whole bunch of stuff today, guys. Felice and I have been chatting about trying to put together something or a show on this particular topic, which is Russian propaganda, misinformation, the infiltration of the U.S. electorate, all kinds of stuff. So we would like to extend a warm thank you to MAGA for allowing the United States to become a Russian territory, basically. But before we get into all that, there's a gifting goal today. Please, please support Felice. Your pay app's in your bio, I would imagine.
So yeah, it's a girl has no name, just like my account name, Cash App, and Venmo. Yeah, and
Gotcha.
it's in my bio as well.
Gotcha. So there's a gifting goal. Please consider subscribing today. A whole bunch of new stuff in the Discord, in our Discord, including subscriber only event channel. So if you subscribe to our channel here, you get access to our Discord, which brings you subscriber only benefits. You don't need to subscribe to get into our Discord, but if you do, there are subscriber only benefits, including discounts on merch, like the I Am Fucking Zen t-shirt. We have a whole bunch of new stuff that's available too. There's some Christmas attire that's coming. Also, just joined Blue Sky over the weekend, and the link to Blue Sky is also in the link tree that's in my bio. I want to remind people, since we're talking about Russia today, I want to remind people the importance of the Sunflower Project. The Sunflower Project was created by our friend Tom at Dagger Custom Apparel. It is all money's raised. $10 for every shirt sold goes directly to the largest Ukrainian orphanage. And we certainly know that Ukraine is under threat more so than ever. So there's a lot to get to. But before we get in, anything burning on the top of your mind that you would like to chat about before we dive in today, Felice?
No, I'm deep in. I was listening to the Center for American Progress stuff on Russian propaganda. That is what's immediately on my mind this morning. But I do think you mentioned it when we were kind of briefly chatting before the show. It's just very fascinating to me how it's so intertwined with the right. And like you were saying, how it's intertwined with Trump's cabinet picks. I'm fascinated. Like I could play the audio. It's interesting because one of the things I like to follow on X, I know you moved to Blue Sky, and I'm going to start posting on Blue Sky as well, but I feel like, X is like a breeding ground for T group. I have to keep an eye on MAGA. You know what I'm saying?
That's true. That's a good point.
While they're keeping an eye on what they're doing. And some of my favorite accounts are the Russian state media accounts, where Americans are translating them.
Right.
And yeah, they're praising actively in Russian state media, Matt Gaetz is our guy, Tulsi Gabbard's our girl, so I find it
you're right. I mean, it's like it's like they want us the governing body to take their administration seriously. But when you have people like Pete Hegseth, for example, and Matt Gaetz, both accused of inappropriate relationships, Matt Gaetz, of course, with minors, which is part of why he's pushing back, not wanting that ethics report released. But if there is a silver lining, either way, he's not going to be in Congress anymore. I mean, if there is a silver lining to any of this, because he's already resigned from Congress. But now you've got climate deniers in positions to support, energy policy. You've got, complete wackadoos that are in the cabinet. You've got people that are Tom Homan is all over Project 2025. You've got Stephen Miller, who's creating policy. So this is what the MAGA verse has become. And this is what they wanted. right? This is what they asked for. But to your point, the Russian sympathizers that are now part of, our future administration, it's pretty scary. So why don't we jump in a little bit? So what Felice and I were talking about and try to put this together is there's I've always believed, and I've been studying this stuff for a while. There's been numerous books written on this topic about Russia, and the Russian government, in particular, the KGB's infiltration into the American society. We have a lot to unpack today. There's a lot of things. Of course, we know, Felice's big brain and her researching chops, and she sent me this outline. I'm thinking, I get to see Felice's outline, the world famous outlines, and there's so much information there. So thank you for that. But there's a campaign, a former KGB operative back in the 80s, talked about a targeted plan to demoralize the American electorate, like in stages. And he said the first step, the demoralization phase, would take about 20 to 30 years. So here we are, right? Here we are. Let's go after the most susceptible / ignorant among us to be able to influence them. And it has worked like a charm. And we can see similarities between not only the Russian propaganda machine, but it was very similar to 1930s Germany. The Russia-U.S. example. Go ahead, Felicia. You're going to say something?
Oh yeah, no. First I just want to say, if you are in my Discord, I did this. This resource we're referencing right now is number 2 on the outline in the live sources section. If you want to follow along, and it is short, it's not long to read. And Fact sent this to me. I have read it. I read it again this morning. It is disturbing, but knowledge is power, right? Like, I mean, this man was speaking in 1984. It's kind of like when you listen to George Carlin's comedy and you're like, how did this guy know?
I know
exactly where we were going to be in 2024.
Well, we criticize the right, but let's be honest, they did this extremely well. They coordinated, and also we're gonna dive in this morning as well about how many resources there are, how many outlets, how many right-wing media outlets there are that have been spreading propaganda. We're also going to touch on a little bit about how this propaganda has made its way from Russia to China to the floor of the U.S. Congress. And Ukraine is a perfect example. It's a perfect example about how there's the Azov Brigade, the Yazis living in Ukraine, lies, bioweapon labs in Ukraine, lies. The NATO issue with Ukraine, more lies. Again, Russian propaganda, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Think about all the people you've spoken to when you've hosted lives or been in lives, Felice, right? It's the same. We hear it repeating itself over and over again. The propaganda machine is a well-oiled machine, right?
Oh, it's eerie. It's absolutely eerie. The one you said, the Azov Brigade. I had someone yelling at me just the other day on the phone, and I'm just like, what? Like, where do these things come from? I think demoralization is a great name. The guy's name, if anyone wants to look it up too, it's on the big think, Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov, and the first stage of the 4 is called demoralization, and I think that is. When you read it, it's so depressing because that's exactly what has happened to America, right? And how he talks about that stage is essentially moving towards a helplessness, right? Like once a people are demoralized, like in his words, it cannot be undone.
Exactly, which is why if you think about these conversations we have with people, which is why facts become so irrelevant in the mind of people who've been brainwashed. They refer to it as brainwashing in this particular article. It starts off in 1954, early on in the Cold War, the Soviet Union created a Committee for State Security, most commonly known as the KGB. The group came to oversee the Soviet Union's internal security, secret police, and domestic and foreign intelligence operations. Across the world, the KGB did whatever it could to thwart pro-Western and anti-Soviet political movements and figures. The group would unalive political leaders with cyanide and other weapons. It would fund and arm leftist groups, especially those in developing nations, and the KGB successfully established moles in the U.S. intelligence agencies. So the exact number still isn't and may never be known for sure, which is super scary to think about that. Also unclear were the group's long-term plans involving the U.S. One glimpse, however, comes from the former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrov Bezmenov, who defected to Canada in 1970. He claimed to know details of a Soviet plan to undermine the U.S., not on the battlefield, but in the psyche of the American public. And we'll unpack a lot more of this, but there's one part that Felice just referenced. In 1984, Bezmenov gave an interview to G. Edward Griffin from which much can be learned today. His most chilling point was that there's a long-term plan put in play by Russia to defeat America through psychological warfare, or a psyop, and demoralization. Long game that takes decades to achieve, but may already be bearing fruit. I think it's safe to say that it successfully bore fruit, right?
And this is another fascinating part. So when you're talking about ideological subversion, right? It's to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. Like, I mean, I think that perfectly sums it up. I mean, as a historical researcher, I mean, that's what I find in these debates, but also I think why I'm fascinated to keep doing them. I feel like I'm in a psyop. You can have all the facts lined up. You could connect the dots. If A equals B and B equals C, the A must equal C, you know, by the transitive property. And lights on, no one is home, right? Like, people are incapable of reaching sensible conclusions. I like that that's included in there to defend themselves, their family, or their country.
Yeah, I mean I think that's the whole point. I think none of us should be surprised anymore. I think what really is troubling for people who stand on facts and want to make sure that we're, providing context and color and information, it's irrelevant to those people that have been brainwashed, to your point. When you've been told this and you genuinely believe that you're on the proper side of history, when you hear there were Yahtzees in Ukraine, of course, your most visceral reaction is, we've got to get the Yahtzees out of Ukraine. And again, when
Exactly.
you develop the trust, right? You develop the trust by saying, same thing with what Schmittler did in the 30s. When he came to power, it was based on his desire was always to eliminate the Jews from German society and make a pure race, right? Enemy from within, poison in the blood. So do those phrases sound familiar at all? So then he sold his base, he sold his population on economic reform, which he did, gain their trust, and then went to do some of the most horrible things in human history. And it's part of the same sort of messaging. In Germany, they called it the Crystal Night. It was referred to. It was the idea behind the Crystal Night was once he got the Germans to believe what he wanted to do was pure in defense of the fatherland, Germany, he basically turned the Gestapo and the SS out one night to go after German-owned businesses, or actually Jewish-owned businesses. They call it the Crystal Night because it was the shattering of crystal, broken glass. So keep in mind that Trump also reiterated that one phrase, like one day of violence, like the one day purge. So we've got a lot of historical context. There's so much here to unpack. And then it kind of goes even deeper because we know that RT Media has paid, right-wing influencers
Yeah, exactly.
millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the years to spread this propaganda. And it worked.
Well, and think about also, like, that's one thing less understood about fascism. Why one of the tenets is like the disdain and undermining and eventual, let's say, elimination of intellectuals, right? You cannot have in authoritarianism and fascism people smarter than dear leader, number one, but number two, you got to get rid of the people first who are pointing out the truth, that can follow the lines of logic, that can say, well, the Azov Brigade, okay, you're saying there's, neo-Schmazis in Ukraine, but as I understand it, there's neo-Schmazis everywhere. There's corruption everywhere, right? That racism exists everywhere. That can make come to the obvious conclusion, that can critically think. Furthermore, why you hear them talk about the defunding of the Department of Education. In authoritarianism, it is so important to stop the teaching of critical thinking, right?
Yeah, they have to. They can't have the electorate be informed. But then the other side, even now, even if there's an attempt to inform the electorate, but because they've been indoctrinated, brainwashed again from this particular article, it's irrelevant. What's the one quote? I have to find that because I thought it was so perfect. You could be standing in a concentration camp in Russia and they still wouldn't believe it. It's right here.
Yeah, he's like, you could take them to a concentration. They could be standing inside it saying it doesn't exist.
Exactly. So let's see. This one, they're programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. Pavlov's dog. You cannot change their mind even if you expose them to authentic information. Even if you prove that white is white and black is black, you can still not change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. Demoralization is a process that is, quote, irreversible. Bezmenov actually thought back in 1984, how ironic that was 1984. Weird, I just realized that the process of demoralizing America was already completed. It would take another generation and another couple of decades to get the people to think differently and return to their patriotic American values, claimed the agent. In what is perhaps the most striking passage in the interview, here's how Bezmenov described the state of a demoralized person. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information by force to the Soviet Union and show him a concentration camp, he still will refuse to believe it until he receives a kick in his fan bottom. When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragedy of the situation of demoralization. That's crazy. That's like, but we see it every day. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. Yeah, you're watching people literally asleep walking towards their own demise. I mean, that's how I see it in America. And like he said, the reason he said that, like I believe what he said in the article is, hey, he saw, like people that had grown up the original Antifa, right? The anti-fascists that had benefited from the movement in the late 50s, the 60s, the early 70s as tainted, right? They couldn't be demoralized because as he described it, they had been exposed to too much socialism, to too much Marxist theory, right? Like they had learned to critically think. They could see the corruption of authoritarianism, of fascism, and so they needed longer, essentially, to then demoralize a new generation that hadn't had those experiences, hadn't been taught that stuff yet. And think about who's being red pilled. It's young kids. Like I remember the first time when Tucker Carlson, oh my God, what an interview, met with Putin.
Wow. The grocery
like,
store,
me,
the whole grocery store thing.
Oh, what a night, what a like pissing match. But I mean, just Putin just standing with his neck on Tucker's boot, boot on Tucker's neck for 4 hours. But I like the next day on the show with Jay, it was a kid, I think he was 20 years old, and it was like he had been given all this new information, and you see, we're being lied to. And he's like, why aren't you surprised? And I'm like, well, I have a history degree, with a focus on Western civilization. I have heard all of this. Like, this is the same story. Putin's been telling this story, and, and leaders before him in Russia. This is carbon copy Russian propaganda. But like they're saying, if you've gotten to a new generation who has not been exposed, right, to mainstream Marxist socialist teachings, then how would they know?
That's exactly right. If you think about, like you said, the red pill, I mean, it's the Andrew Tate effect. It's young white men, it's white people in general thinking they're going to lose their place on the hierarchy scale. And if you think about the shifting in the American electorate, it coincided with a lot of this demoralization campaign, because blue collar workers, by and large, used to be the solid Democrat. It used to be a solid Democratic base. Right, the Rust Belt. Think of the Rust Belt, because those never used to really be swing states. They've become swing states because a lot of this, the Democratic messaging not necessarily reaching out enough, Hillary Clinton not campaigning in the blue wall during the 2016 election, famously, right, which cost her. So that became an opening. So let's go after these lower educated, uneducated, the poorly educated, in Trump's words, easily susceptible, easily manipulatable, manipulative, and easily manipulated. And then that kind of opens the door, right? And here we are. Because by and large, it's the white men that we speak to in this space that talk about these same examples of Russian propaganda. And they repeat it over and over again, simping for Russia without even realizing it. Every single talking point that's been part of this brainwashing experiment from Russia and the KGB is literally part of MAGA speak. Talking point after talking point after talking point. It's crazy.
I couldn't agree. Yeah. And I just like to say, you don't know what you don't know, and the basis, right? I like to think, and I was in all AP or international baccalaureate programs by high school. I was quite precocious, but I don't think I truly learned to think critically until I got to university. You know, like I think
Yeah.
that was when I was truly challenged. And because by nature of getting a history degree, that's what you're essentially being asked to do is look at the US from a world perspective, you know, see the US from a different perspective and think critically. And if you're not being exposed to that, do you have a chance? And like you're saying, playing off things that are really occurring, right? That well, what white men feel is the dispossession of white America, right?
Right, right.
It's
Jared Taylor, you know him, right? The white nationalist who did that interview with
yes, absolutely. With the I can't
Eddie
remember
Wong.
his name, but
Eddie Wong. Yeah.
yes, Eddie Huang. There you go.
Yep. About and he talked exactly about that, the dispossession, and it even though he thinks it's literally about it's his first of all, it's his own disgusting views about white tea supremacy, but it's still rooted in Russian disinformation and propaganda. So all of it's related, and we've been saying this for a long time. The collectively, there's been so many books written on this. I think about American Compromise that was written about Donald Trump specifically in the 80s and how the Russians targeted him because of his, guess what, ego and his narcissism and his ignorance and his susceptibility to misinformation. We, I think we can confidently say that Trump is leveraged. I think there's no doubt that he's leveraged and whatever that means. And I think in Russia knows that and Trump knows that and the people around him even know that, but it doesn't seem like they care.
Sorry, I did it again. I agree.
Okay.
I think that what's going on is it's not just I mean, a malignant narcissist is out for himself, right? Trump is out for number one, but he's leveraging these feelings that people are having inside. I was talking to you about one of my favorite books, The Wages of Whiteness, right?
Yeah.
Which was it's essentially it's talking about during the times of slavery, right? In reality, slaves actually had value. That you had to buy a slave. Back then it was a purchase, that you weren't, maybe you were financing almost, maybe you were making payments. So slaves had this intrinsic value, whereas actually a lot of white laborers, they would go to places like mills, right, and work the mills because a slave cost money. There was an investment in that. White laborers, if they were going to lose a hand or an arm or whatever, like they were almost seen as less valuable. And the wages of whiteness is sort of telling the story through time of the capitalists, the billionaire, the donor class, right? Prior to capitalism, it was the aristocracy, it was kings and queens. The onset of capitalism, this became, right, the capitalists, the people with the capital, right? The people collecting the privatized profit. And they said, hey, how are we going to fool straight white men? They're going to
Yeah.
notice that they're being dispossessed. They're going to notice that we are robbing them. What do we do? And that's what the wages of whiteness is about. It's about saying, so straight white men will feel important. So they don't notice that they are also being robbed in real time. Hey, they'll get pulled over by the police better. Their skin color will give them privilege in society. They will enjoy free benefits, and hopefully then they will notice, hey, or not notice that they are also in the same boat with everyone else being robbed. And it's worked for a long time, but that's like where the Jared Taylor stuff comes into play. It comes into play when you look at what are white men saying, right? To a lot of white men, the march towards equality and equity feels like dispossession. It feels like inequality to them. It feels like they're losing their status in society and they want it back. And instead of saying, looking around, because we've lost critical thinking skills, our education system has failed people, and saying, oh wait, we're all on the same boat. We're all slave laborers in capitalism,
Yeah.
handing the surplus to the donor class. But instead, they look at brown people, they look at women and say, no, not your DEI jobs. You're not taking, I was special. You need to stay down there so I can remain special. When the real answer is, hey, we're all in the same boat being robbed by the same people. Sorry, that was a little long, but
No,
passionate
I
about
mean, don't apologize. You're right. I mean, and again, and I'm going to play I have the Jared Taylor sound. I'll play that because I think it's important for people who don't know. But what you're talking about is the whole point. It's the aggrieved, or the, in the minds, air quotes, the victimization of the white man in America, and they generally think that these things won't happen to them because so far they really haven't. But when we talk about tariffs, when we talk about mass deportation and what those things will do to our economy and to our society, the people who will suffer the most are the people that are the working poor. And it doesn't matter your skin color in that case. It's literally the working poor. So why don't we play this audio? Some of you may have heard this before, but this is Jared Taylor, is a known white nationalist, being interviewed by Eddie Huang, and he's talking about exactly what Felice just mentioned.
Guys, tap the screen while he plays it. Let's get facts to 100K. Sorry.
And please give Felice. She should not be sitting at 793. Let's get it done.
How it is you voted for Donald Trump when you're so into facts, because his entire campaign is not based in facts. It was all based in propaganda and emotion.
I voted for Donald Trump for one reason only. His policies, if implemented, would slow the dispossession of whites in the United States. If he were to deport all illegal immigrants, if he were to think very hard about letting in any Muslims, all of this would slow the rate at which whites are becoming a minority.
Why are you so worried about the white dispossession of America?
Because I want my people to survive. Is that so strange? We don't control China. We don't control any place where whites are not a majority. And if we become a minority, we will not control our own destiny anymore.
I grew up in this country as a minority, as the children of immigrants. I was their first child born in America. And while I didn't have much possession or didn't much control, I really enjoyed myself. And I think that if you ask a lot of Americans, they would say that I had a lot to offer this country. You know, according to you, I guess I would be perpetuating the dispossession of white America.
That is true. That is true.
Would you say that you wouldn't want me in this country?
At some point, when my ancestors built this nation, they did not build it with the intention of giving it away to Mexicans or Chinese or Haitians or to anyone else.
Do you consider, you keep saying your ancestors built this country, you consider that a fact?
Who else built it?
Black people, Native Americans, Chinese people who came and built the railroads.
Do you think none of that could have been
Italian
achieved?
people.
But they're Europeans, aren't they?
But you believe in evolution, right?
Evolution, I think, explains a great deal.
So according to evolutionary theory, we're all out of Africa. So at some point, your ancestors were sub-Saharan Africans.
So what? At some point, our ancestors were unicellular animals.
So I'm saying at any point in time, we could say you were an African. So you're choosing to pick this point in time and say you're a descendant of white Europeans.
Why do you think I'm choosing this point of time?
Because it's in favor of your politics at this point.
It's because I'm alive now. Come on.
My issue with you is that I don't think you have enough compassion and vision, not because I don't like what things are now. It's that I have hope and belief in what they could be.
So yeah, so that's Jared Taylor, by the way, the Hank Hill sound-alike. He's the known white nationalist in Eddie Huang. Thoughts, Felice? I know you've probably heard that before, but
Oh yeah, I played it on my show. I mean, I think he's speaking plainly, and I don't know how much we should validate any of those feelings. I appreciate the honesty in it, though, right? And I do think it is that simple. Like there was a time in America where uttering anything about the replacement theory, you would be fired from your job. You couldn't say those things on the internet. You know, that was, neo-schmaltzy rhetoric. You couldn't speak it. That is, a lot of it, that is also Russian rhetoric, right? That's Russian propaganda. It's isolationism, right? That was the start of isolationism and fascism, the nationalism, and it starts with the othering of other people. And that's what he's doing. And whether, I think there's different degrees of consciousness to why people supporting MAGA are spewing the replacement theory. But that is, I mean, that's what you're saying. It's people need to start understanding that is essentially very plainly what they're saying.
Yeah, and this ties right into what Felice just talked about. This ties right into the Russian propaganda machine because they're gonna capitalize on this. They're gonna. I mean, think about Tucker Carlson, who's a known Russian plant, no doubt about it. He was the one that started spreading great replacement theory. Then we heard it. Obviously, the Jews will not replace us. This is all part of the totalitarian, authoritarian propaganda, disinformation, misinformation that the Russian government has been part of for decades. I posted this story, the one we're referring to about this KGB operative, our former Russian KGB operative, and why it's so important and why we talk about this, because it's not going to continue. And the sad part, and I just read you that portion of it, the sad part from his perspective is it has to crash and burn for supporters of that mindset and that ideology to feel it, right? Because women feel it every day. Members of the BIPOC community feel it every day and have been for decades. The people who haven't felt it are white people in our country. And they're the ones that are going to have to feel it, right? And if you look at the past election, the holdout groups are white men and white women holding on, digging in their claws to hold on to that place on power. And he talked about the dispossession of white America.
I think that's important, and we have spoken about this passionately, and I think we're both in agreement of why the future, like, direction. I think a lot of people after the election loss are looking for direction, or saying where is the future, who do we target, how do we change things for the midterms. And I think that is why we need to target women, right?
Exactly.
Like you're saying, white women are experiencing, I hate saying the word woke now, but that's essentially what it was about. Was
Sure.
Once you see what is happening in America, once you wake up to it, right, you can never close your eyes again. You see it very plainly. The wealth transfers, the trickle up to the top of the economy. And so, yeah, I think women are our target audience because they are beginning to. White women always enjoyed protection. I don't know how much you guys are into intersectional feminism, but like intersectionality, the easiest way to explain it is like the seat of power in Western civilization is straight, white, Protestant males. Every degree you are removed from that seat of power, right, you're dispossessed from power. If you're a white woman, they've essentially been 1 degree from power. Straight, white, Protestant woman, right? Okay, not a male, too bad, but they've always enjoyed this sort of agreement, an unspoken agreement of protection. We prop up straight white Protestant males. In exchange, they protect us. It's sort of an agreement. And for the first time in history, right, because of the declining birth rates in Western civilization, white males are showing, white straight Protestant males are saying, oh, surprise, white women, we don't care about you. There are circumstances under which we will not protect you. And women are waking up to that fact. And I think it's fascinating to watch because I think black and brown women, we've known.
Yeah.
We know no one's coming to save us. We've known for a long time. Black and brown men have known for a long time no one's coming. And as white women have to contend with that fact and sort of process it, that's why they are the most available, vulnerable, and educatable group in the electorate, I feel, because this is something they can no longer ignore. And like we talked about, they have children, right? We have a problem with younger white males. Well, yes. Who has access to these young white males, to the 14, 15, 16-year-olds who in a couple years are going to be voting? Their moms.
Exactly, right? So they're young, they're blue-eyed, blonde-haired little boy who may be then found guilty horribly of sexual assault. Right. And then they find out that this young man supports Trump and or Andrew Tate and or Jordan Peterson and or the Charlie Kirks of the world, where they constantly hear the messaging about you don't need to respect women. They need to follow you. They are beneath you. You are the alpha in your household. So the mom's like, holy shit, what have I done? And then their daughters could become victim to those same men. And once again, they chose to put that type of belief in power. and I might have shared this with you. It's like coming out, sort of doing the after action review from the election. It's like I think that there's four distinct categories. It was the white boy rage that Donald Trump tapped into in the messaging, Russian propaganda, all this kind of stuff, right? All the things we're talking about today. It's the fact that our electorate is not very bright, an uneducated electorate. I think it's the ability to be easily manipulated, and I think it's we always talk about how women, in particular white women, why would you vote against your best interests when it's actually they voted for their whiteness? They voted for the preservation of their place in society, maybe without even knowing it. So all things doesn't
I
even
think
matter.
a lot of it is unconscious, but it is. And I think some of them they're clinging to that hope. Like they're almost in disbelief. Like, hey, this is how this has worked. We vote together and you'll save me, right?
Yeah, I mean, not that women in our country or women anywhere need men to save them, but literally the irony about this circumstance is that, again, it's the head scratcher for me was when I sort of realized that it wasn't about their voting against their body or their best interests. It's literally a voting for their whiteness. Hey, Erica, what you got there?
Well, this is part of the Facts Christmas collection. So please do head on over to the merch store because I have been very busy. Also, this one's for you, Fax, because I know you wanted this one. I don't know whether you'll be able to see it.
Oh, nice. Regulate Dick, not Jane. I love that. Thank you so much.
Preach.
That's fabulous.
There we go. So there's two Christmas t-shirts with the Santa facts and the elf facts, and two sweatshirts, and then Regulate Dick Not Jane is in a hoodie and a tee.
They're in the merch store. If you subscribe to the channel, you get 10% off all items at the merch store. So, Erica, I know you and I have talked about this whole phenomenon with Russian propaganda and misinformation, and et cetera. And I'm curious from your perspective. I know your country has also been susceptible to these kinds of things as well. Anything that stands out to you based on what we've discussed already, or do you have another perspective on it?
Well, obviously, I'm not sure all Americans know this, but there have been various assassination attempts on British soil of ex-Russian dissidents who have come to this country for safety, both times using something called polonium, which is incredibly dangerous. And once, one of those times, it actually members of the general public actually unalived from that also. So I think it's really important to remember that this, when you were talking earlier about, poisonings and stuff of Russian dissidents, that's still happening. That stuff is still happening, right? It happened to Alexei Navalny. It's happened to various people on British soil. And, we know for a fact that Russian propaganda was used during the Brexit, the Brexit referendum. We know it's been used in our elections. We know it's been used in your elections. And it's just scary for us. Ukraine is a ton closer to us than it is to you.
Yeah.
But we also sit in a very unlucky place in that we're kind of halfway from Moscow to the United States, and we're a known ally of the United States. And Putin has already said that he's happy to let us go first in anything that he has planned. I'm not so keen, if I'm honest, on that plan. So yeah, it's just, the amount of Russian disinformation coming out is frankly, it's not just worrying now. It's dangerous.
Yeah. Well said, Erica. Thanks for jumping in. I appreciate that, and thanks for the merch, the updates to the merch. Appreciate that. By the way, everyone, we are streaming on YouTube as we speak. I think you're on. I think we're on Felice's YouTube channel, and I know we're on our YouTube channel as well. So I think that we've got our socials covered. Thanks for jumping in, Erica. Appreciate you very much.
No worries. I'll go teach some humans. Bye.
Okay. Bye. and we don't consider, typically speaking, as selfish Americans, we don't consider the influence of Russian propaganda throughout other places in the world. I mean, Western democracies. So their propaganda campaign has been targeting Western democracies, and of course, because we as Americans think, we're the king of we're the cream of the crop, we only think about ourselves. But our partners in Europe, and she brings up a really good point about how the UK and other Western allies are a hell of a lot closer to Ukraine than we are. You know?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think more importantly for people, I think it's a misunderstanding of Americans of how the economy works, how the global economy functions, right? Like if I hear one more time, just which I could reference the article from the outline I made. I mean, it's been referenced, but all of the rhetoric, the isolationist rhetoric, we need to protect our own border before we protect Ukraine's border. That is 100% Russian propaganda.
It
That
is.
has been pushed out to you. That is now being parroted by the Republican Party. Like wherever the idea came, right? The global economy, the reason we're in the inflation situation we are, which again, Americans have a misunderstanding of inflation. A huge part of that was what? It was the Ukraine war and the destabilization of the global supply chain, specifically around labor and dock workers. Like from 2022, what was happening, like everyone, what was happening, it wasn't about the interest rates. Yes, we were holding them high and we needed to do that. It was about the ironing out of the global supply chain. So for Americans to have this idea that what happens in Europe doesn't affect us, well, you're delusional.
Yeah, I mean, you see the shift in the American electorate because blue collar workers, talked about this earlier, used to be a core base within the Democratic Party, and over the decades, the past 20 to 25 years, Russian propaganda has been chipping away at that for a variety of reasons. And I don't know about you, Felice, but it's difficult when you're in an uphill fight against propaganda and your propaganda is fueling hate, and that hate is targeted at brown skinned people for the most part, but it's women, it's members of LGBTQIA, it's the BIPOC community. So when you've got the truth on your side, no matter how many times we talk about it, it's almost futile, right? It's almost futile because you've been taught that everybody else except your whiteness are the enemy. So that's why it's easy to cheer at rallies, mass deportation. It's like, I mean, think about how it's just horribly sad that is. That is history repeating itself. Again, Yahtzee sentiment, the enemy from within. That was the Jews, and that was the bureaucrats. That was the elite in Germany. That's no different than what Trump's talking about now. The enemy from within, poisoning the blood. That was the Jews. That was the non-Aryan Germans. That's the same thing in America, poisoning the blood. Now it's immigrants, it's Mexicans, it's the people from shithole countries. This is
No,
this is
absolutely.
the propaganda machine is reminding people of that. Crazy.
Yeah, no, well, and remember, that's why, and very specifically, that's why fascism starts with rounding up the intellectuals, right? Rounding up the Marxists, the socialists. That's who went first. Anyone who could point out, oh, look what he's doing. I'm going to explain it to you, do you know? And then it moved on to the othering. And understand, like, I think something that people falsely or misconstrue about what Schittler was up to was, not, I think it's like 98% of the Jews that were in concentration camps, they were not German Jews, right?
No.
They were Russian Jews.
Russian.
Because what was he doing? The exact same thing that Donald Trump is talking about, right? He had his it was called the Lebensborn program. Hitler was creating this like master race, right? And they needed somewhere to grow because because Germans felt there weren't enough jobs, there was not enough opportunity, and there was not enough land. And so what he was doing, and he had an agreement with Russia that he betrayed, right, was sort of, we're going to clear all this space out, right? And this is the opportunity. This is where my master race is going to go. And that's what Trump is saying. They're taking your jobs, right? They're taking your housing opportunities. They're taking your, social security benefits. We'll get rid of them,
Trust
and
in
then
me.
everything will be okay.
Yeah.
But if you do basic research, as a matter of fact, our economy is desperately dependent on this labor. They are paying into Social Security through ITIN numbers. Like these people are paying in to Social Security, and they never take it back out. They are doing us a service, right? And they, in fact, to remove that cross section of labor for our economy would damage our economy.
You're exactly right. And again, so the Russian propaganda machine looks at history, right? They said, okay, the German people believed this propaganda. So it was Goebbels and the propaganda machine. So Goebbels is Stephen Miller now, basically. It's same kind of person. Sadly, we laugh about it, but it's friggin' true. So he was able to convince and I talked about this briefly before. So Schmittler was able to convince his people, because of the economic conditions in post World War I in Germany were horrible, right? They were really, really bad. Unemployment was really, really high. Because of the Treaty of Versailles, there were certain things that they couldn't do. So Schmittler, once he got elected, initially he went in on anti-Semitic rhetoric, anti-Jewish rhetoric, but it wasn't working because Jewish people in Germany in particular, Russian Jews, German Jews, were integrated in society. They were marrying, Aryan Jewish, German Jewish were marrying each other. It was part of society. The Jewish population in Germany was growing. There was investment into Jewish communities. So Schmittler said, well, we need to stop this. So when he started to go after Jews, the German people were like, yeah, we don't really like that. So he literally stopped talking about it for like 3 years. Meanwhile, that was always the plan. It's always the plan. So Russia saw that, okay, the Jewish people in Germany, it's the immigrants, it's the brown skinned people, it's women, it's the intellectuals, it's the elite, it's the George Soroses of the world, right? Still some anti-Semitism sprinkled in there. Meanwhile, the whole plan all along has been, let's deport. So I'm going to convince you, Trump's going to convince his base, again, Russian propaganda, Schmittler, going to convince the base that it's the economy. Trust in me. It's like the snake from the Jungle Book. Trust in me. Exactly. And it worked. And the Russian propaganda machine said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We'll just recreate history, and we'll just use the same talking points that 1930s Germany used on its base. And here we are.
Yeah. And basic data refutes all of that, right? All you have to do is think past surface level, and basic data refutes it all. We know there's no correlation between immigration and crime. As a matter of fact, if you want to be safer, you will move to a neighborhood of immigrants, right? They're like 50% less likely to be incarcerated. I was just reading a new study. It's unbelievable, right? You are actually safer around a group of immigrants, but we want to believe otherwise. And it all starts with the othering, right? That is the key in fascism, is this nationalism. And do you know, oh my gosh, I'm going to get it. I'm going to think of his name later, but he's this fabulous creator. He's not unlike me. He was raised by a malignant narcissist. So he's very into psychology. And he has the best definition of nationalism, right? Nationalism is the narcissism of many, right? And
Wow.
it's so, yeah, and it is true. That is what it is. Nationalism isn't just being patriotic. It's literally saying, I am here. We are gods. We do no wrong. Everybody else is just a pawn to be used in a game. They're wrong. We are right. We're up, they are down. We are white, they are black. It is the full on othering and the belief that you are 100% at an elevated status above all others. And that is the danger of American exceptionalism, American individualism, right? That's what capitalism has created, is this, I will step on anyone to get a leg up. And the answer, the healing of America, and this is now just me pontificating, is the collective, right? How do we get back to a point when America was most successful is when we were working as a collective?
And that's kind of part two. And we're going to touch on all this stuff today. And because this conversation can go in a million different directions. But when you've got the Russian propaganda that has worked, and then you've got the right wing echo chambers, you think about Elon, you think about Charlie Kirk, you think about Joe Rogan, they are kicking our ass in the social circles because they've created these, people on the right by design don't trust the mass media, don't trust the mass media, don't trust it. And it's worked. So now if I'm an impressionable voter or a person hasn't bothered to kind of go to the critical thinking element that's necessary to navigate through this stuff, they're told not to trust the news outlets, but you can trust me. You can trust me. I'm Elon Musk. I'm Joe Rogan. I'm Charlie Kirk. I'm Ben Shapiro. I'm Jordan Peterson. And then those groups being funded by Russia to spread that Russian propaganda, it's worked. It has obviously worked. Everybody, please keep tapping and sharing. Please consider contributing to the gifting goal. Please consider subscribing. You mind if we take a guest or two, Felice?
No, absolutely.
All right, we'll bring up Chillaxophone. Chillaxophone requested earlier. Chillaxophone, how are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you?
We're doing fine, thank you. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, so I've been doing some thinking since this election happened. I think I personally should have been able to see Donald Trump or someone like him getting elected back in 2009. Quick story. 2009, I'm a tech support agent doing tech support for a number of companies, but namely Frontier Communications. They had just bought lines from Verizon in a number of states, West Virginia being one of them. That transition was terrible. It's neither here nor there. There's a caller I got who called in just because he needed to know what his password was. And when a tech support agent gets a call like that, you have to ask a security question to verify that you're talking to the account owner or somebody who has approval. This particular person's security question is, what is your favorite book? Now, when you're presented with a question that you don't know the answer to, the phrase "I don't know" is perfectly acceptable. But this man's exclamation was something that has stuck with me for 15 years, ever since I heard it. This man's answer was, "Hell if I know, I don't read books." Yeah. So that was very jarring to me as an answer to that question. I literally had to put him on mute for like 2 minutes and I had my face in my hands at my desk because I couldn't process his answer, because it was just so shocking to me that he would just exclaim that he just doesn't read books instead of just saying he doesn't know. So after that call was over, I did some looking into where he lived in West Virginia, and come to find out there were many areas of West Virginia at that time where 25% or more of the population was illiterate. So fast forward to today, that represents at least 54% of adults that can't read above a 6th grade level. So we have a real competency crisis in this country, and the more that furthers, the more all that Russian propaganda is going to work. Because we're in a day where now people, a lot of people look down on people who know things, who have expertise in their given fields, and they'll just listen to anybody who says anything that makes it sound good or makes it believable.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is kind of what we've touched on in a variety of ways this morning. It's about the susceptibility of the American electorate based on lack of education or an unwillingness to kind of learn more. There's examples in history that have worked. We can talk about coming off of post-World War I, where there was Woodrow Wilson. It was all about isolationism. It was about America first. We sort of ignored Germany, which led to the rise of the Third Reich. So these things are all relevant as to why we've gotten to where. She'll be back, I'm sure. As to why we've gotten to where we are. That's part of the problem that we find ourselves in. But I appreciate you bringing that up, Chillaxophone. Thanks a lot, man. You have a good day. Okay.
You too.
All right. Bye. There she is. She's back. Okay. There you are. You're back. Hello.
I'm not sure what just happened. Sorry.
Who knows? All right, everybody, please keep tapping and sharing. We appreciate you guys very much. Hold on one second. Bring this up. Reports are coming in that the Trump administration is prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion through a mass deportation progress. So that's a program. So again, this is posted on True Social. Donald Trump himself has said true in all caps that the reports are coming in. The Trump administration is prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion through a mass deportation program. So for those of you who've said that it's not real or that it won't happen, it's here. History repeating itself. It doesn't mean martial law.
I think
Go
well,
ahead.
and it's interesting. Yeah, well, exactly. And that's the interesting thing. Like, understand how it's a violation of your constitutional rights. I'm in the swing state of Arizona, like, and now I'm gonna forget what it was. It's like SB something, it's one of our state bills. But during the time of Sheriff Joe Arpaio, this is what people in Arizona voted for, was essentially, it did not involve the American military. That's the scary difference, right? It was just about deputizing like local police and sheriffs, which became largely unconstitutional. Because while you're trying to round up
Right.
undocumented people, what you're actually doing is racially profiling brown and black American citizens, accosting them and asking them to SB 1070. Thank you so much, Arizona Mike, for the win. Yes, you're actually rounding up American citizens and violating their constitutional rights and saying, hey, you look like you're not from here. Prove to me you're from here, right? But then imagine the next level of that, because actually one of the, Arizona, we did vote to codify abortion in our constitution, but we did also approve, I believe it's like Proposition 314. You can look this up, where we're going to deputize our local police again, as if we did not learn the first time, to again make them ICE agents. What Trump was talking about, they put our MAGA state legislature, put that on in our state as a proposition on our ballot, and it was approved. So that's something we're doing. But think about this. In the federal indictment that Jack Smith brought against Trump, that talks about the fake elector scheme, one of the indictment right before the Supreme Court's decision about official and unofficial acts, part of in that indictment was right about it, exactly what you just said. They were saying, they're saying, hey, if you didn't win legitimately and you don't leave in this office, you don't leave the White House, they're going to riot in the streets. And Trump said, that's what Jeffrey Clark is for. That's why I'm bringing in Jeffrey Clark, is to invoke the Insurrection Act.
Yeah, that's why we have the Insurrection Act.
It is unconstitutional to turn the American military on American citizens on U.S. soil. And that is what Trump is essentially doing. He's going to declare an invasion or a state of emergency, right?
Yeah, the Alien Enemies Act, right?
And he's actually going to try to turn the U.S. military on American citizens. I don't know what is more unconstitutional than that.
And all of this, it still touches on our subject today, because the Russian propaganda designed to scapegoat brown and black people, that they are the enemy, from within. And it's not just that, because Trump's gone on the record to say that it's not just the invasion, as he likes to say, from brown and black people. It's people like us, at least people on the left. We're the radical left, apparently. So then we should be expecting a knock on our door too. Again, Russian propaganda, Russian misinformation. It's hate everybody else, but actually the people that are fucking you, the ones that are really out to get you, are the ones that are telling you everybody else is to fear. This is our reality, ladies and gentlemen. We're not here to be hyperbolic, but this is the shit that we've been telling you about for a very, very long time, which is why we continue to call Donald Trump a fascist and an autocrat and a dictator wannabe, because he literally is following the script. And it goes deeper into this article, because they talk about this period of demoralization. Once demoralization is completed, the second stage of ideological brainwashing is destabilization. During this 2 to 5 year period, asserted Bezmenov, again, the person who provided context for this story, what matters is the targeting of essential structural elements of a nation: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. Basically, the subverter, in this case Russia, would look to destabilize every one of those areas in the U.S. considerably weakening it. The third stage would be crisis. It would take up only up to 6 weeks to send a country into crisis. The crisis would bring a violent change of power, structure, and economy, and will be followed by the last stage, which is normalization. That's when your country is basically taken over, living under a new ideology and reality. Man.
I mean, and we're about past demoralization. Like, I mean, that's where we're at. We're at stage 2, essentially, at the destabilization of the economy. Things like pandemics, right? Like, these are sends our country into a crisis.
Yep.
Right. And I mean, think about what he's saying. I mean, he's absolutely spot on. And like, it always comes down to the othering. America has done a great job of othering. We do that with T groups as well, right? That's what George W. Bush started. The idea of, hey, just declare declare them a T group, and then you can enter sovereign territory or use your U.S. military on American soil, right?
Exactly.
Identify other group, identify them as an enemy, and then you have the right to do some sort of horrific authoritarian action.
And we're living it now. I'm going to take a little pause from our conversation, although I'm sure that there will be references to what we're just discussing. I want to welcome Daniela Mestenik-Young back again. I always appreciate when Daniela decides to join us. And I was thinking about her post-election because we were all sort of potentially counting on I'm not going to say the end of MAGA, but maybe the sort of the gradual decline. But now that they've won, Daniela, your thoughts. I don't know if you guys have ever met Felice. Daniela, Felice.
Hi, nice to meet you. I loved everything you were just saying.
A pleasure. No, and I think I don't know if it's the first time you were on Fax's show. You were on Fax's show one time, speaking about your book and speaking about your experiences. Like, I grew up in extreme evangelical religion, and then was in several abusive, let's say, high control groups like Division I sports, things like that. It really spoke to me. Like, just so to the point where I had tears in my eyes. Like, I love your story. I love a strong, intelligent woman. Like, you're an inspiration.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think this is relevant to the question because what I tried to do when I wrote Uncultured was take this idea of cult, which everyone thinks of as so extreme, so far away. Everyone tells me like they can't imagine my experience. And I'm like, but I relate to your experience. I relate to seeing cult stuff in all of these American groups and facts. I mean, I feel like we're